Hello and greetings to all of my friends at the Asia Future Forum. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm going to start on a rather somber note. I hope it'll end up being a liberating reflection. GDP is growing at a slower rate all over the world. This has been happening now for nearly 2 decades. The reason is productivity has been declining all over the world for a generation. The result is we have a lot of structural unemployment, especially among a young millennial and Gen Z generation who are trying to find their place in a 21st century workforce. And our economists are projecting 20 more years of low productivity and slow growth. And let me do the numbers for you. After 2 industrial revolutions in the 19th and 20th century, here's where we stand. Arguably half the human race is far better off today than our ancestors were before we began the industrial age, granted. I think it's also fair to say, however, that 45% of the human race making $5 a day or less, which is the poverty level, are really no better off than their ancestors were before we began the industrial age. And while half the human race has done much better, the other half of the human race no better, the very wealthy have really done well. The 8 individual wealthiest human beings in the world today, their combined wealth now equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the human beings living on Earth. That's 3.5 billion people. There's something very dysfunctional about the way we're organizing the economics of the human family. It's clear that the great industrial era that we've been living off of is now in a steady and rapid decline. But now we have a more severe crisis. For 200 years and 2 industrial revolutions, we have been going into the burial grounds of a previous geological era, the Carboniferous era, and we've dug up the dead remains of plant and animal life from a past period of history in the form of oil, coal, and gas. And this is the wealth we've used to create the industrial way of life. Now we've spewed so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere from burning these fossil fuels and methane and nitrous oxide, we can't get enough of the sun's heat off the planet. We are in real-time climate change. Not a theory, no longer looming, it's here. And I want everyone that's a parent here in this room today at the Asia Future Forum to listen to what I'm saying. Our scientists tell us we are in the 6th extinction event of life on Earth. Doesn't even make the headlines. The most important story we've ever faced in the 200,000 years we've been here on this Earth. And our scientists are saying that over the next 7 or 8 decades, we could lose half the species inhabiting this planet. That's a massive die-out in the lifetime of your little babies today. The last time we had an extinction event of this magnitude was 65 million years ago. We are asleep. And our scientists in the UN climate panel now have told us we have 12 years, now 11 years, to completely transform civilization, create a completely new global economy to save our species and life on Earth. This is a razor-thin timeline. What do? We need a new economic vision for the world. It has to be compelling. We need a game plan to execute that vision. It needs to be quick in both the developing world and the industrial nations. We have to be off a carbon-based civilization everywhere in the world in less than a generation. So we need to step back and ask the question, how do the great economic revolutions in history occur? If we know how they occur, we will get a roadmap and a compass here at the Asia Future Forum that allow us to navigate a new journey. There have been at least 7 major economic paradigm shifts in history. They're very interesting anthropologically because they share a common denominator. And that is, at a moment of time, 3 defining technologies emerge across a civilization and converge to create a general purpose technology platform, an infrastructure that fundamentally transforms the way society manages, powers, and moves its economic activity, its social life, and governance. What are those 3 technology revolutions that come together? Number 1, new communication revolutions to more efficiently manage our economic life, social life, and governance. That's pretty obvious. Number 2, new sources of energy to more efficiently power our economic activity, social life, and governance. Also obvious. Number three, new modes of mobility and logistics more efficiently move our economic activity, social life, and governance. When communication revolutions converge with new energy regimes, new modes of mobility and logistics, it transforms the way collective life operates across a civilization. It changes our business models. It changes our governance. It changes our temporal spatial orientation. It changes the human story. We are now in a convulsive endgame for the fossil fuel civilization. And wherever we see fossil fuels, we have authoritarian failed states in the Middle East, other parts of the world. Does anyone here at the Asia Future Forum today, anybody in this room, believe we are in the sunrise of the fossil fuel civilization, or even the crest? It's clear that we're heading to an end game. So where do we go from here? So let me explain what this is. We have had a communication revolution in the last 29 years, the World Wide Web and the internet. We have 4.5 billion people connected. Pretty soon everyone will be connected because we now have smartphones for $25 with more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. So now this digitized communication internet is just now beginning to converge around the world with a digitized utility electricity grid, an energy internet, allowing millions and millions of players, small and medium-sized enterprise, homeowners, large companies, even governments, to generate their own solar and wind on site. And what they don't need, they are sharing back on a digitized energy internet using the same digitized technology, the same analytics, the same algorithms that they use to share information, news, knowledge on the communication internet. And the two come together. Now these two internets are converging with a third internet, a digitized mobility and logistics internet made up of electric and fuel cell vehicles powered by solar and wind energy from the digitized energy internet. And those vehicles and shared services are going to be autonomous on road, rail, water, and inland water in the next decade. And those autonomous vehicles are going to be managed by the same data and analytics we use for the communication internet and the energy internet. These three internets, the digitized communication internet, the digitized renewable energy internet, the digitized mobility and logistics internet to manage, power, and move the society, right on top of a platform called the Internet of Things. In this new era, the buildings become the nervous system. Every building across Korea and around the world is going to be retrofitted to make them energy efficient, to be resilient for climate change events. And every building will become an edge data center to manage data. The old clunky centralized big data centers of today are going to look old-fashioned. Every building becomes a node, efficient. Every building becomes a micro power generation site for solar, for wind, for geothermal energy. Every building becomes a charging station for your electric vehicles. Every building is a storage outlet so you can send energy back to the utility grid and be part of the infrastructure when the grid needs it. And if there's an emergency, a climate event, a cyber terrorism attack, you can go off grid and then re-aggregate with your neighbors across communities and manage your energy, your mobility, your logistics, your communication in a distributed and decentralized manner. This is the revolution. On the upside, it's a great leap in entrepreneurialism. It moves us from globalization to glocalization. The first and second industrial revolution infrastructures were designed to be centralized, top-down, proprietary and intellectual property, and they they vertically scaled in order to return investments because fossil fuel and nuclear power are by far the most expensive energies to extract, to ship, to refine, and to take down the line. The third is now, this first and second industrial revolution, because of the engineering of this platform, gave rise to national markets, because we could manage power and move economic activity with larger collectivities. And then the second industrial revolution took us to global markets with container ships and with air travel. But now that second industrial revolution is waning, The third industrial revolution infrastructure is very different. This infrastructure, and everyone under 40 here that's a digital native will understand what I'm about to say, this infrastructure is designed to be distributed, not centralized. It works best if it's open and transparent, not closed in intellectual property. If you keep it open, you get the network effect. The more people engage, the more everybody wins. And it scales laterally, mainly in blockchains, in order for everyone to be part of a more distributed, equitable social entrepreneurialism. This takes us from globalization to glocalization. So instead of 500 giant companies being responsible for a third of the GDP with only 62 million workers, and that's out of a workforce of 3.5 billion, with globalization, it's already happening around the world. Local regions in Korea, in Europe, in the Americas, local regions and local businesses are beginning to connect with each other all over the world, virtually, physically, at very low fixed costs and very low marginal cost. And this is taking to us a more lateral, flat, glocalized world. This is a big leap forward for humanity. Now, there's a downside. How do we deal with the dark net? It's as impressive as the bright net. How do we ensure network neutrality? How do we make sure that governments don't purloin this third industrial revolution brain and infrastructure to hack the elections of other governments? That's already happening. How do we make sure that big internet and telecom and maybe even electric utilities don't purloin this internet, commodify our day-to-day experiences that we all have, use it to sell to third parties, and then create algorithm governance over our day-to-day lives? This is already happening. How do we protect against cyber terrorism? These are heady, dark net issues. We're going to have to spend a lot of time and a lot of resources building redundancy into this global infrastructure, meaning we need to make sure that if there's a climate event, if there's a terrorist attack, if a renegade country tries to monopolize this, billions of people can just go off that central grid and go decentralize and power their own communities together with solar and wind and electric mobility in day-to-day life. This is the democratization of commerce. This is power to the people, literally and figuratively, with your big data, with ICT, with energy, with mobility. Let me say this changes the business model fundamentally. With the third industrial revolution, we see that the digital technology is so efficient that it really reduces marginal cost of doing business. When marginal cost of doing business gets very low, market capitalism becomes too slow. With markets, we have sellers and buyers. It's transactional. The seller transactions so that the service or good goes to the buyer, and then it's over. Then they have to start over again. It's a start-stop mechanism. And that means in between every transaction, you have overhead cost, advertising, marketing, you have warehouse availability, too slow. In a digital world that's all connected, communication, energy, mobility, every building a node, we move from markets to networks and from transactions, market capitalism, to flows, which is network capitalism. And even though the marginal costs are low in this new world, you make it by 24/7 flow of activity. There's no start-stop here. So you're constantly connected. Some of the marginal costs are getting so low it even heads to near zero marginal cost. Then we're in the sharing economy. And every young person knows the sharing economy. We now have hundreds of millions of people every day who are sharing their own music. What did it take for Psy, the Korean performance artist, with a little digital recorder, to do a song and dance and bring 3 billion people to his website in 3 months for almost no fixed cost and near zero marginal cost? This is the revolution. This is power to the people. So we're sharing music, we're sharing YouTube videos, we're sharing news blogs, we're sharing knowledge with massive open online college courses taught by the best professors. Kids are getting college credits. And then there's Wikipedia. We are democratizing knowledge. The whole human race is constructing the knowledge of the world on the 5th largest website, Wikipedia, and it's zero marginal cost. It's not in the GDP. We're now sharing energy. The fixed costs are plummeting for solar and wind. They are now, and I want you to hear this, in Korea. The fixed costs now of solar and wind are far below the cost of nuclear power, far below the cost of oil, far below the cost of natural gas. And now, I want you to hear this, solar and wind have just gone below the cost of natural gas. And the price is plummeting because their fixed costs are on an exponential curve and their marginal cost is zero. The sun hasn't sent us a bill. The wind has not invoiced us, unlike uranium, coal, oil, and gas. So what we're finding in Europe is this. I was privileged to be a principal architect of the European plan to move to a zero-emission economy. I've worked with the last 3 presidents of the European Commission. And we have Smart Europe, which is going to take us to a zero-emission economy very, very quickly. I've also privileged to work with the leadership of the People's Republic of China. Premier Li, when he came in, announced in his biography he had read my book, The Third Industrial Revolution, and had informed the government to follow up on the narratives I'm laying out to you today in the Asia Future Forum. I've had official visits to China. We've had conversations between Europe and China. And now the key elements of the 13th five-year plan in place, according to the Chinese press, have largely come, much of it, from the ideas and narratives we shared with our friends in Europe and China. So I suspect that the next big player here is going to be Korea and Japan. Watch Korea. Korea has been at the cutting edge of the communication revolution. Korea is a cultural icon. When you look at the young people, all of the brilliant changes are coming in Seoul, Korea, Berlin, and Greenport in Brooklyn. So now you've got to move to energy and mobility. You're still in a centralized, old-fashioned, tired, dying nuclear and fossil fuel complex, and it's taking you into stranded assets. Because the price of solar and wind are now cheaper than all these other energies, the marketplace is speaking. It's more powerful than these old energies. And the longer you stay in these old energies, most of which you have to import, you get into stranded assets. And so Citigroup, the great bank, announced that we may have $100 trillion in stranded assets in the fossil fuel complex because it's coming to an end. That's all the exploration rights that'll never be used because the oil will never be taken out because solar and wind are cheaper. The refineries that'll never be used. The pipelines that'll never be used. The gasoline stations that'll never be used. All the industries that go with that. So what we're talking about is the biggest bubble in history, the carbon bubble. In a new book that I will have out in the next few months, in the next month actually it's out in the US, but in Asia and Europe, we project that the fossil fuel civilization will collapse because of the plunging crisis of solar and wind by 2028, leaving us tens of trillions of stranded assets. Those countries that are still locked into that old fossil fuel civilization will go down, the market speaking. Those countries that have moved toward a third industrial revolution, smart digital paradigm, will survive and prosper. And most importantly, the new paradigm is not only an increase in aggregate efficiency, it takes us off a carbon civilization. It moves us into a more prosperous society. It helps us build the new businesses of the 21st century. It allows us to have millions of people employed, and it hopefully allows us a razor-thin path over 20 years to restart our relationship with the planet, to live more lightly on Earth, to protect our fellow creatures, and to ensure that the human race and all of our other fellow creatures are able to have their moment in history on this beautiful and mysterious planet where life exists on Earth. So I'm privileged to be here with you on the Asia Future Forum. You are the leaders of this new generation, but you have to move quick. We're on a razor-thin path. If we don't transition within 15 years, we're going to see a cascading series of environmental events that could threaten our ability to survive on this earth in 80 years from now. So this is a mission. This is a great crisis in history, but every great crisis comes with an opportunity. Korea should be at the head of the pack. Korea should be leading Asia. Korea should be leading the world. And a younger generation of digital natives in Korea, they're ready to go. It's time now to make that happen. There is no fourth industrial revolution. This was a fiction by the World Economic Forum back a couple of years ago to try to introduce a new marketing gimmick. And so what Mr. Schwab did is he said, well, the third industrial revolution is the communication internet. But now this revolution in AI and robotics and genetics is so powerful that it's moving us to a completely new venue beyond that. He has a total misunderstanding of infrastructures. Robotics, AI, and genetics, they're all digital. They're all about information, turning biology into analytics and algorithms, and using AI and robotics. The first industrial revolution was steam power. The second was analog electricity. The third is digital. It was a marketing tool. I'm always hopeful, but not naive. We are at the most critical point in the history of our species in the 200,000 years we've been here. And what I'm saying to all the younger people, if we don't transform this society quickly out of a carbon-based civilization, and we've got less than 20 years, we're doomed over the long run. So having said that, the third industrial revolution does transform the economic system. In a world that's digitally connected with communication, energy, mobility, the IoT platform, it goes from transactions and markets to flows in networks. It goes from sellers and buyers to providers and users. It goes from ownership of property to access to services. It goes from productivity to regenerativity. It goes from externalities to circularity. It goes from GDP to quality of life. While the capitalist system is moving into this completely new direction with completely new business models, some of the marginal cost from the tremendous efficiencies of a digitally connected world, the marginal costs are going so low that there's no profits at all, even in a flow. And this is giving rise to the sharing economy. We now have hundreds of millions of people at any given hour of the day who are sharing their music, their YouTube videos, they're sharing their news on social blogs, they're sharing massive open online college courses taught by the best professors, getting college credits. They are sharing knowledge on Wikipedia. So the sharing economy is now side by side with the shift to capitalist networks. The government cannot do it alone. Everyone comes together, the NGOs, the religious organizations, the students, the neighborhood associations, the chambers of commerce, the union labor. Everyone comes together during disasters because you need everybody to deal with the enormity of the response and then the reparations that occur with that, the changes. So in a climate change world, every community has to be in disaster mode all the time, which means peer assemblies have to be continually alert, learning from each disaster, engaged all the time with their local government, and learning to prepare in new ways moment to moment. There's no government in the world that can go alone and do all this for their communities. So as we get more frightened, we become more alienated from government because they can't handle this. The whole community has to do this. What these children are learning is biosphere politics, not geopolitics. They're learning that everything we all do, every day in our life, in every moment of our existence, has a dramatic effect on all other humans, all other creatures, all other ecosystems, and the spheres of the earth. This is the silver lining. We're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to be conscious. We're going to have to listen to the earth around us. We're going to have to feel it and experience it and understand our relationship to the earth's rhythms, the earth's spheres. I think that market capitalism and now network capitalism, there needs to be transformed. We cannot have unlimited growth. We have to have sustainable growth, light living on this planet, and still have a quality of life. To do that, we're going to have to change the business model. And I am somewhat hopeful that Korea will be a leader. I watched Korea. I'm just telling you this. I watched Korea become the poster child for post-World War II. I've watched Korea become the cultural hub. I've watched Korea become the 10th largest power in the world. Now you've got to transform your thinking quickly